I'm Eric Marcus, and this is Making Gay History. Randy Shilts got bitten by the bug his senior year of college. He wanted to be a journalist. But not just any journalist. He wanted to be a big-time, big-city newspaper journalist. There was only one problem. Randy was gay and out, and in the early 1970s, there was no such thing as an out gay journalist at a mainstream big-city newspaper. But Randy was determined and fierce. By the time I met him in 1989, he was the leading journalist in the U.S. covering the AIDS crisis, and he had 2 books under his belt. The Mayor of Castro Street, about Harvey Milk, the assassinated San Francisco city supervisor, and the award-winning bestseller, And the Band Played On, a gripping history of the early years of the AIDS epidemic. But in his adopted hometown of San Francisco, Randy's unflinching coverage of the AIDS crisis earned him a lot of critics. Early on in the epidemic, the city's gay leadership bristled at the unwelcome attention they feared would derail the community's political progress. And when Randy called for the closing of the city's gay bathhouses as a way to slow the spread of HIV, he was vilified by those who weren't about to give up their hard-won sexual freedom. Randy was accosted on the streets and shouted at in restaurants. So here's the scene. It's the evening of Tuesday, September 12th, 1989. I arrive at Randy's modest but comfortably decorated house on Saturn Street overlooking San Francisco. Randy's hyperactive golden retriever greets me at the door with a cold nose and a wet tongue. The dog's name is Dash, after hard-boiled detective novelist Dashiell Hammett. Before I even have the chance to unpack my equipment, Randy is talking a mile a minute, interrupting himself, interrupting his own interruptions. He shows me into his living room, takes a spot on the sofa, and tries to get Dash to settle down without much success. But I managed to clip my microphone to Randy's sweater, and we're off and running.
1969, I graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. So Stonewall happened 3 weeks after I graduated from West Aurora Senior High School, Aurora, Illinois. And so, and then I was the only time, and this is what's so different now than even when I was in school, is that, you grew up with never hearing anybody talk about being gay. And the one time, I think before I was 18, I heard the word homosexual was in this incredibly enlightened context where my sociology teacher, who was the teacher I admired beyond all other teachers, who was so neat and really liked me, where she said, maybe they're not criminals, maybe they're just sick. And then she stopped, realizing that what she had said was hopelessly radical, and said, well, at least that's what some people think. That was, and I'll never forget that because I knew so well that I was gay then.
This is in 69.
And had numerous sexual exploits in Boy Scouts and everything like that. So I knew I knew I was gay, but of course very self-alienated about it. And then you hear that from somebody you admire, and that's it.
Do you recall what you thought when she said that you were just sick as opposed to a criminal?
I think what I thought was that it was the most liberal thing that I had heard at the time too. That, gee, maybe I'm only sick. But there are so many levels, that your psychology works at when, you're, when you're a fucked up 18-year-old closet case, or 17 at that time. And I left Aurora the minute I could, and at the end of 1969, and hitchhiked to the West Coast. And with this woman friend of mine, and she had mentioned that there were lots of bisexuals on the West Coast. And that was obviously a big drive for me to do it. But I was also a hippie, so I had my hair long, and was smoking marijuana and listening to the Moody Blues and reading Herman Hesse and doing all the things that, staring at the three-dimensional album cover of Satanic Majesty's Request and all that stuff. The three-dimensional cover of Satanic Majesty's Request is a Rolling Stones album that had a three-dimensional cover on it that you get stoned and stare at and see the little pictures of the Beatles in the corners. And so I fell into the counterculture in Portland, where I lived, and was very hippie, but still couldn't bring myself to come out. It was it was this taboo, and it was violating this taboo that I couldn't make myself do. I had no links to my home, to my family. I was very independent, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
Were you in school at the time?
Yeah, I was at I had to work my way. My parents were pretty poor, and we were because I was a hippie and they were very conservative, we were estranged for 2 or 3 years and didn't talk. So I had to work my way through college and went to a community college for 2 years. And it was in my second year of community college, though, that I came out that I had my last heterosexual affair with my philosophy teacher. And one reason I had an affair with her was because in philosophy class, in every one of her classes, she would bring in people from the local Gay Liberation Front in Portland to speak. And I figured, well, gee, and so one of my attractions to her was that I could meet, it was, my last heterosexual affair was just all a ruse to be able to get to meet other gay people. And then and I met one of her gay friends who was in the Gay Liberation group, and we talked, and it was the first time. It was just like in 1 week, I was able to put the whole gay thing, shift it from being my problem and society is right and I'm wrong, and I was able to really pretty much adapt the political analysis that, gee, I'm all right, it's society that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so it was a week after I met this guy and was able to sort of talk about this stuff that I was teaching a class in anthropology, cultural anthropology. I was going to be an anthropology major then. So what I did was change it at the last minute and invited all my friends, and then had 2 women and then this other guy from the Gay Liberation Front. And then I was on the panel, and I introduced the panel and said, we were all gay, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be gay in America. So all my friends were there. And I told all my friends that day. I told everybody in my life that day, and told my parents within, and about a year later. Yes, it was May 19th, 1972.
Mm-hmm. How did your class react?
Everybody was great. I mean, everybody was real cool. I didn't lose this. I only lost one friend. It was very easy. Everybody was very accepting. And then I moved to Eugene, and the next fall I went to the University of Oregon, and I became just totally involved in the gay movement, and was the president of Gay People's Alliance, which was, I think that was formed in 1970. It was one of the oldest gay campus groups in the country.
Which one is this? Which school?
Eugene Gay People's Alliance at the University of Oregon.
How many people were in your group?
Boy, we'd have meetings of up to 100 people. Most meetings had just 20 or 30. And the first meeting of every semester would be packed because everybody would come to see who else was gay. And then about 80% would disappear back into the woodwork of the school. And then...
that sounds very familiar.
Yeah, but then we did a lot of rap sessions, and that was very crucial to my integration, as I think, in terms of integrating a positive self-image and understanding. In terms of really talking out how our problems as individuals, being gay and accepting ourselves, how they related to a broader political framework of us within a society in which we were brought up to dislike ourselves and to doubt ourselves. And so it was just this real intensive talking. And so then we did things like put on the first gay dance at the University of Oregon. And then we put on the first, it was the gay straight sock hop, and it was all 60s music. And we allowed straight people, and made, we're very liberal. And then we did the gay pride program and did speakers, and we had Morse Kite come up. And
you did?
Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon.
Back to the dances just for a moment.
Yeah.
Did you experience any resistance from the school over doing these dances?
No. Mm-hmm. No, because I was very powerful in student government, so they really couldn't fuck with us.
You had a very serious foundation as a troublemaker early on in your career.
Yeah. Once I understood the whole gay issue politically, then it all fell into place almost right away, because it just gave me a political context to understand, what was going on.
Did you must have decided at some point you were going to be a writer, journalist?
Well, that came very late, though. I was an English major by the time I was at the University of Oregon, and I was going to write great novels. And then I was, but I couldn't write a simple declarative sentence because I was an English major. And they don't teach you how to write, they teach you how to read. And so then I took a journalism class because a roommate said, oh, well, they're good at teaching grammar. And so I took a journalism class just to learn grammar, and then I was so good at it, if I do say so myself. And I just took to it so well that was in my 4th year of college I did that, and I stayed in an extra year and got my degree in journalism. And in November 1974, I got a William Randolph Hearst Award for a story about drag queens in Portland. And so I always wanted to write about gay stuff. And then my second award was another Hearst Foundation Award for a story about discrimination against gay people. It's called In Hiding. It's a very dramatic story where I interviewed all kinds of closet cases and, prominent people who, had to conceal who they were.
In Portland?
Portland, Seattle. So I worked real hard in journalism school and got tons of awards. Was real good, got great grades, but I'd been very out front about being gay. And
did anyone say then, as was said to me when I was in journalism school, being out is going to really hurt your career?
Graduate student types were very blunt and just said, you can't do this. You're just not. It's not going to work. You'll never have a career. And I was real adamant that I was going to be out front. And once you come out, especially in a very public way, the way I was, and so involved in campus politics and stuff, that you can't go. It wasn't an option. So in Oregon, so let's say so what happens is 75 comes, I'm about to graduate, and I can't get a job anywhere.
Did you send your resume out?
I sent my resume, and people who didn't have grades as good as mine were, who didn't have my awards, who didn't have, who hadn't done as much on the campus newspaper, they were getting job offers. And I wasn't.
What does that make you think?
Well, it was just so clear that it was discrimination. And at the same time, because I'd won those 2 awards from the Hearst Foundation, I was rated as one of the top 8 college journalists in the United States when I graduated. And so they took the top 8 college journalists, and you participated in the National Writing Championship. I won 2nd place in that, and then the night that we won, I took everybody out to the gay bar because it was here in San Francisco and I'd been here before. And then they freaked out. The Hearst people freaked out, and then a few weeks later they took away the award. They said they made a judging error, $1,000, and they canceled the check before I could cash it. And it was so devastating because I realized then that I wasn't going to be able to get a job, and so I was going to make it as a freelancer. Because I swore when I got out of college was that I'd never make a penny except through my writing. And so that was my resolution that I stuck to.
How did you finally get your first job?
My first job was, I was freelancing, and I went to Portland, and I was going to freelance for Portland Publications and then for The Advocate. That wasn't panning out as a professional thing because there just weren't enough publications in Portland. So then I moved down here, and The Advocate wouldn't give me a job, but they more or less assured me that I'd be able to have $600 a month worth of stories. So I just came down here and worked and just devoted myself to writing for them, and then within 5 months became staff writer at The Advocate. That was hired there in April of 1976, and then got to cover gay stuff, which was fun. I thought it was lots of fun. I always wanted to work in the mainstream media, but I was covering stuff that I liked, and it was a great training ground.
Did it make you crazy though that here you were, one of the 8 top journalists in the United States.
And I was writing for this publication that had all these dirty classified ads in it that I couldn't send the publication to my parents that I worked for because it was all filled up with gay white men want somebody to piss on, And it was so embarrassing, because it was, sometimes I go back and read little diary fragments I wrote back then. And what's really striking about 76, 77, 78, both is the ambition. I was really ambitious, and I just knew, it was never a question of whether I was going to make it, because I knew I was. And I just worked around the clock and every day of the week and was always freelancing something and working. But just the anger, the rage, just the horrible rage. And then with me, part of my story becomes then I start drinking over it and stuff. And so that's because I think I was just probably born with alcoholism in my genes. But I think it came out a lot sooner than it would have.
Who did you rage against?
Well, at the beginning, it was just this big nebulous them, all the places where I couldn't get work. It becomes more specific as time goes on, because I'm at The Advocate and doing good stuff. And then I get my break, which was a big break, was in February 1977. KQED had Newsroom, which was a nightly news show. And so they wanted to start covering gay stuff. They're going to be the first, because nobody covered gay stuff. Oh, the Chronicle and Examiner, TV stations back then never covered gay stuff. It's like it didn't even exist. So they were going to be the first people to do this. And so they wanted somebody who was openly gay to do it, somebody who they could say in a press release was gay, because they knew that'd be good press. So anyway, so I got it. Even though I wasn't that, I had a horrible voice. I'm not really meant for TV. But
you must have been thrilled.
Oh, it was just the thing. I had arrived. The St. Paul Pioneer Dispatch, which won the Pulitzer for AIDS, a few years back, assholes. But they ran a thing, homo hired to be TV reporter. I probably still have that around somewhere. The ratings were miserable on the show, but strategically it became very good for my career because people into news read it. So all the editors and opinion leaders and in the news business got a sense of me real quick. My first story was about Harvey Milk, February 1977, for a story about Harvey Milk in the District 5 race. I knew one thing about Harvey Milk, that he was just this great story. He was just going to be the best story, and
because he was a character.
He was a character, and he was going to win. And it was so, and he was, but also he articulated a vision. He was an idealist. He was a visionary in the true sense of the word. And then the Castro Street was so fucking exciting. I mean, it was just so exciting to be gay and be on Castro Street. It was just neat. Because it was, we were going to create a new world. The new world, the new way of being gay was coming from Castro Street. So
what was the new way to be gay?
the new way of being open about being gay, of not having to be hiding, of being powerful, asserting your power. When gangs came in to beat us up, we organized our own street patrols, and that kind of responding, not being the sissies anymore. It was so different, and being butch, and being, the whole thing of totally recasting what being gay meant in America. And we were doing it on Castro Street, and the rest, and in the gay world, everybody else in the world was following us. We created it. We were the Mecca. And so it was so heady. And it was a great time to be a journalist, because you knew that I knew I was writing about, and this gets back to my anger, that I knew this was so fucking important. And nobody was covering it. They cover the news stuff about, Harvey getting elected and stuff. And that's because once I'd been at the TV station for a while, it was clear, everybody said I was a great reporter, and then, because I come from a print background, so I did intelligent
You knew what a story was.
Yeah, exactly. And it was it wasn't like a TV guy. And so and that was then the rage, because then I couldn't get a job. So I applied at the Chronicle and at the Examiner and everywhere. Nobody would hire me. I really wanted to write for the Chronicle. I really wanted to be in the mainstream and be back in print. And then I started applying at TV stations. This was in 1978. My break came in commercial TV the week after the riot happened, after the Dan White trial. And everybody realized they needed somebody to explain this. So KTVU Channel 2 let me start freelancing for them. And I freelanced for them for about a year. Until a magazine that was a short-lived magazine here called Boulevard's Magazine had the 10 most eligible gay bachelors from San Francisco. It was in May of 1980, and that was the number 2 after Armistead Maupin. And the news director saw that, freaked out, told my best friend at the station that it was a disaster for my career, that I shouldn't be, that it's one thing to be gay, but you shouldn't talk about what you want in a boyfriend. And
which you did in the article.
Yeah, so of course that's what you do when you do a most eligible bachelor. Better like rock and roll, and better like the Rolling Stones, and something like that. And he stopped using me. When you're a freelancer, you don't get fired.
You crazy.
Well, it was just so fucking weird. And then that was around the time that, this is the big despair hits. Then the KQED newsroom, the news show got canceled in August of '80, so I went on unemployment. And then that's when I wrote the Harvey Milk book. Basically because I didn't have anything else to do. Nobody would hire me. And so I did the Harvey Milk book, and then I finished that, and then just a few weeks after it, the city editor, they had a new city editor, or he'd been at the city editor at the Chronicle maybe a year, and he loved TV people, and loved the show I was on, and hired me.
Were you the first openly gay Chronicle reporter?
I was the first openly gay news reporter in the country, except for a guy named Joe Nichols at the Post. Had come out in Anita Bryant in '77. I was the first person who was hired as open, So whatever that distinction is, but certainly at the Chronicle. Yeah, it is.
It's a big distinction.
And so that was in August of '81. And in fact, it's ironic because AIDS had been detected just weeks before then, but I didn't start doing major stories. The big story that started everything. And it was in March of '83, and I talk about it in my book. That story where there's the study about 1 in 300 gay men in the Castro had been diagnosed with AIDS by then. Well, this is when everybody thought it was media hype and it wasn't real. And 1 in 300, now it's 1 in 10 had been diagnosed with AIDS. But then that was so shocking, I thought it was real important. And then I found out that all these gay leaders had had this study for 2 months. and hadn't done anything with it, hadn't done anything to tell people about it. Oh, we'll release it through appropriate channels, which meant, the gay press, or they have to have another meeting to decide about it. And, and everybody's out there getting fucked in the bathhouses every weekend and thinking that AIDS is media hype, and they weren't releasing this information. So I wrote it up, and when I was writing that story, I had the president of the Alice Toklas Democratic Club called me up and said, if I print that story, they'll put barbed wire around the Castro. People called up my book publisher. Somebody called my editor at St. Martin's, Michael Dennedy, and had Michael Dennedy call me in San Francisco to try to talk me out of doing the story. And I mean, did nothing but answer phone calls all day from people, the gay political leaders, trying to get me not to do that story.
What'd you tell them?
I just told them I don't get paid to not write news stories. To me it was just so obviously the news value was there. And just their way, and it was, it just made me so mad, And you see, and that's the thing is because, see, if I had been serving what was then perceived as the political interest of the gay community, I would not have written about AIDS in 1983. But from a journalistic point of view, it was so obviously a story. So that started it. And then within a couple months of that, there was the first bathhouse thing, which was the gay leaders had a meeting with bathhouse owners and asked them to put up posters warning people about AIDS. And the bathhouse owners refused. And just said, they walked out of the meeting. They said, we're not going to put up, you're blaming us for AIDS. We're not going to do it. I mean, this is really, and so I heard about the meeting. And again, they didn't want the story. People heard I was going to do a story. Oh, don't do this. You can't even talk about the bathhouse. So I just did a story. And at the beginning, I wasn't for closing the bathhouses. But I just thought it was an issue that you had to. You couldn't talk about this disease and not talk about bathhouses. I used to go there. I know what happened. And I worked in the bathhouses one of my summers in college in Portland.
I mentioned to a few people along the way that I would be interviewing you for this book. People have very strong feelings about you.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's funny because people say, oh, you must like controversy, and I hate it. I'm very sensitive, and my feelings get very easily hurt. And so they're hurt a lot. And then some of the stuff that comes, I've lived my whole adult life being open about being gay, and then I get people hassling me who've never, for being an Uncle Tom or something, or being self-hating gay. That's what they do. And I just think, my God, you've never, these people who've never had anything comparable to being, living the kind of very public gay life that I have. It just gets me mad, It'd be better if I didn't. Sometimes I do internalize it too much. I spend a lot of time with my therapist when we're talking about it.
It's a good thing to have one. I would be worried if you didn't, given the position you've been in.
No, I don't get any better. But then on the other part of me thinks, well, I think the reason my writing is good when I do the important stuff is that the sensitivity comes out and I'm able to draw. If I became an asshole, if I became a thick-skinned about that, I'd be thick-skinned in my writing and it wouldn't be as sensitive.
You still have a heart.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you like being a celebrity?
Oh, it's weird. It's just weird. It's interesting being a gay celebrity. And today I was buying my washer dryer for my house at the river. And the straight guy with a wedding ring on, and this is Santa Rosa in the appliance store. And so he was writing down my name from the credit card, and he said, "Oh, you're not the Randy Shilts." What? and I said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "The author, gee." And it was like, it's what's interesting is that, and I haven't quite got. It's like that people don't see me as being a famous queer, they see me as being famous, that's what blows me away. Because I would have expected the gay thing to be much more overriding. But, and maybe that's just because it's not as shocking to be gay anymore.
The intro now is best-selling author Randy Shilts as opposed to gay reporter.
Gay, and it always used to be, in fact, people used to joke that that I should get my name changed to gay reporter Randy Shilts, because it was always this 4-word unit, and now it's best-selling author, and it's lots more respectability than I ever thought I'd ever have.
By the time I left Randy's house, I was spent. He was intense. But I also had a new friend and mentor. Randy encouraged me to call whenever I needed help, and I did several times when I hit a wall with my book and needed a pep talk. Randy was also generous with his research and shared with me a big box filled with FBI documents that he'd secured through the Freedom of Information Act. One of those documents corroborated Frank Kammeny's story about the FBI showing up at the 1961 organizational meeting for the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C. It was all spelled out in the report in black and white. What Randy didn't share was that he was HIV positive by then. He'd found out in 1985, but he waited more than 7 years after a collapsed lung landed him in the hospital to share his AIDS diagnosis with the world. According to the Los Angeles Times, Randy kept his diagnosis secret for fear it would detract from his role as a reporter on AIDS issues. He said, "Every gay writer who tests positive ends up being an AIDS activist. I wanted to keep on being a reporter." I remember wondering at the time about Randy's decision to keep his diagnosis under wraps and feeling troubled by how defensive his explanation was. What was much more troubling was a made-up key protagonist in And the Band Played On. The person was real. He was a French-Canadian flight attendant by the name of Gaëtan Dugas. But Gaëtan's role as Patient Zero, as Randy characterized him, an HIV super spreader who traveled the U.S. like a typhoid Mary Johnny Appleseed, was false. A recent documentary called Killing Patient Zero examines the story in sad detail. It was explosive publicity about Patient Zero that helped propel Randy's book onto bestseller lists. I can only speculate that Randy's profound wish for success and fame undermined his better journalistic instincts. Randy Shilts died from complications of AIDS on February 17, 1994. He was 42 and survived by his partner, Barry Barbieri. Randy's memorial service program included a final message to his critics, a quote from a letter Randy wrote to The Advocate magazine a month before he died that read, "And while we're talking conclusions, hopefully, history will record that I was a hell of a nice guy and that the people who have criticized me are a bunch of fools and bimbos." Randy was indeed a hell of a nice guy, at least to me. The rest is complicated. Many thanks to everyone who makes Making Gay history, including story editor Inga Dataya, associate producer Ali Lemer, audio engineer Catherine Cook, researcher Brian Faree, photo editor Michael Green, and our social media producers Christiana Pena and Nick Porter. Special thanks to our founding editor and producer Sarah Birmingham and our founding production partner Jenna Weiss Berman. Our theme music was composed by Fritz Myers. Thank you to the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division for their assistance, and thank you to Con Edison for their generous support of our education work. Season 10 of this podcast has been made possible with funding from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, the Calamus Foundation, the Kipper Family Foundation, Christopher Street Financial, Mary Cadigan and Lee Wilson, Brian, Christine, and Alex White, and scores of other individual supporters. Head to makinggayhistory.com where you'll find all our previous episodes, archival photos, full transcripts, and additional information on each of the people and stories we feature. And to keep up with what we're doing, sign up for our newsletter on our website and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please keep those 5-star iTunes ratings coming so more people can discover our proud history through the voices of the people who lived it. I'm Eric Marcus. So long, and until next time.